It's August 22nd, 2022. This is Roqe. Hi there. Welcome to episode 196 of Roqe. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Nice to be talking to you. Hope you're keeping well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. Hello to you from Toronto, Canada. Back in the Roqe studio. Salam Dustan Aziz, Durud Bar Shama. Hello, Groovy Shaya. Hi, Smart Pega.
Hello.
Hello. I know, everybody's dying. We'll get to that. It's nice to be back in Toronto. The lights are on.
Welcome
the
back.
studio is working.
Back.
The microphone is this thing on?
Yes, welcome back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back. Kai Bird, an American historian, journalist, columnist, Pulitzer Prize winning author. His latest book is called The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. I can tell you it's a fantastic... You were a history student or a poli-sci student?
Poli-sci.
All right. I was poli-sci history. If you're at all interested in politics or history, American history, Iranian history, this book is fantastic. I really enjoy. He's a great writer. The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. in just a little while to talk about Carter vis-a-vis Iran, the hostage crisis, the revolution, the tensions within the Carter administration, the push and pull of whether to continue to be friendly with the Shah or to jump ship as they eventually end up doing, whether to allow the Shah, who was in exile, into New York at that time, all of these questions that surrounded the Carter administration and, of course, the hostage crisis. But it's his take on Jimmy Carter, the president himself, that is really interesting and somewhat revelatory. Kai Bird joining us in a little while on this book that I have quite enjoyed and on some new perspective on what happened during that period leading up to the revolution and then the hostage crisis and the role of the president, Jimmy Carter. So we'll get to that as our featured guest today. Hey, Talking to Persians.
Yes.
So this is our the first of our documentary series, travel series, going around the world and finding the Persians. This is in London. It's Talking to Persians London that we shot last fall. We released it a few days ago. If you haven't watched it yet, it's on. First of all, if you haven't watched it yet,
You must.
you must.
Absolutely.
I mean, come on. It's on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Roqe Media. I've never seen the channel myself, but no, that's it. We have over 15,000 views in just the first few days. Haven't done any advertising, no marketing, and so that's pretty thrilling. And we do hope that if you haven't checked it out yet, you will. Talking to Persians London at our YouTube channel. We've been putting up little clips from it on Instagram as well. And we put the audio version on our podcasts last week. But it's been really, really satisfying to get the kind of reaction we've been getting.
Definitely.
There's some amazing letters that have come in about Talking to Persians. I should explain why I'm the only one talking, because you two, first of all, Captain Reza's off on a film shoot. Keon's in Europe. The rest of the team is in an infirmary and a hospital. I came back from... my body clock is all over the place. I'll get to that. But I came back from my travels eastward. And Shai, you've had COVID.
Yes,
You have COVID.
Yes, I have COVID. Yeah.
I thought this was post-COVID now.
No,
You think you still have it?
Yes, but I don't think that I'm contagious. Yeah.
Shai's wearing
Not
a
anymore.
hazmat suit. He looks like one of those people who works in a nuclear laboratory. He's like a full-on mask and the goggles and everything. Well, thank you for rallying. And Shai was doing last-minute editing on Talking to Persians. Turns out while he had COVID.
Oh my gosh.
You see? And what were you doing?
The dedication.
You were at a club somewhere. And now
I can't remember the last time I went to a club.
You apparently... Smart Pega. You're smart, but you definitely go to clubs. I see you on Instagram. You're always at a
Those
club
aren't
somewhere.
clubs, they're
What are they?
lounges.
Oh,
There's a
lounges. Okay,
difference.
sorry. I heard the terminology is
Yes.
getting me sad. So now you are also sick,
I am.
but you
it's
did not.
COVID.
You think it's not COVID.
No, I know it's not COVID.
Uh-huh.
I've done 2 PCR tests, and it's not COVID.
You're exhibiting all the signs of COVID, and you were hanging out with Shia, but you don't think you have COVID.
Well, I mean, the PCR test says otherwise. So,
right.
as far as those tests are concerned, it's not COVID. I've been told it's a chest infection.
Oh boy. Well, I feel great being surrounded by you guys.
We're keeping our distance.
But okay, well, I'm thank you both for rallying and joining me on this podcast, because the other kids are away, and it's nice that to have you here. I'm sorry you're both in recovery.
Thank you.
I was in Cambodia, and then I was in Istanbul. And so and in succession, so a few days ago I was in Istanbul, and then before that I was in Cambodia. And if people watch us on Instagram and stuff, they'll see I was posting little videos and stuff from there. So my body is completely fucked up. It has no idea what's going on.
How'd you sleep last night?
I don't. Yeah, I really. There's all kinds of things happening with my body. My body's angry at me, wondering where are we? What time is it? Who are you? I don't recognize you anymore. But I had such a cool time, and it was really interesting talking to Persians from there. I was I was in touch the whole time with you guys, of course, and kind of watching it spread out. Like we say, we just put it up there a few days ago, and I hope people do check it out. YouTube.com/Roqe Media for Talking to Persians. We've got some letters that I'm going to read after Kai Bird. We won't keep him waiting, but we'll have there. We are coming to you on roqemedia.com. It's there that you can link to all of our platforms. We're on an ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity. We are on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, and CastBox. If you like to see some visuals with Roqe, switch over to YouTube right now. And if you like your Roqe descriptions and bulletins in English and in Persian, check us out on Telegram. Hey, if you want to support us or be part of our mission, you can become a patron of our show by pressing the Support Us button at our website, and or you can become a sponsor. Get in touch with us at info@roqemedia.com. We love sponsors.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, and we have some sponsors for our Talking to Persian series, and it makes all the difference. So do be in contact if you want to help us out. So now, Shia, you are feeling a little better?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's the first time that I got COVID. Like,
you were a holdout.
Oh, wow.
The rest of us, remember when Keon was giving us COVID a few times?
yes.
And everybody had COVID, and you were escaping the COVID.
Yes.
Now that everybody in the world has already had it,
Yeah.
now you've decided to get COVID.
yes. So it's weird. Like, one day you feel good, the other day you feel very tired, and today I'm in I'm a little bit tired, but I can. Yeah.
Do you know where you got it?
No.
You don't have any suspicion?
Yes, I do have a suspicion. I went to a birthday party, and probably from
It's so hard to track, though. I mean, there's so many people who are not exhibiting symptoms, but they're carriers, and the people who are exhibiting symptoms but past the contagious period. So
I'm really enjoying this new voice of yours.
I do too. I like it, actually.
Yeah, it's and you are. How long have you been feeling, showing all the signs of COVID, but claiming it's not COVID?
Well, I think it was like Thursday night I started to really feel it, but of course I went out all weekend. And so I think I got really...
Is it perhaps you're just hungover or something?
I really don't drink enough to be this hungover.
You just need some sleep?
Maybe just some rest.
And this is great listening for people. Just listening, hearing coughing, and I mean,
raspy voice.
Jesus. I can tell you that you asked me about my trip.
Yeah, how was it? I was waiting to get to that, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, first off, I mean, Istanbul I've been to, so I know it's incredible.
Yes.
But tell us about the first part of your trip, because I haven't experienced.
Well, folks who know me know that I love Southeast Asia. Years ago, I went there the first time and did some worked with a development group organization, and I've just returned there as often as I can because I just love places like Vietnam and Laos and Philippines and but Cambodia being my favorite place, and I have some friends there now, so I go to Phnom Penh, and I just I love the ancient civilization. I love the temples. I love the people. The energy there is. I mean, for folks who've gone to Cambodia, they get it. They'll always go, yes, I love it too. And if you haven't gone, you kind of, especially Persians, they're like, Cambodia, you know, like why are we going to go to Cambodia? You know, but I'm telling you, it is a really, really special place. Of course, you can go up to the big temples at Siem Reap, Angkor Wat, but Phnom Penh, which is the capital, which is where I go and where I have some friends, it's just a special vibe. Now, this time, I didn't really get off the grid.
Okay.
That was kind of my hope, but no such luck.
It didn't happen.
Between checking in on Roqe
Yeah.
and doing a bunch of work and then checking Arsenal scores, I mean, it was...
Well,
you know,
I was going to say, you found a football fan. I saw that post on Instagram.
I found football fans everywhere I go.
Yeah.
I look for Arsenal, you know. So, and yeah, I found a group in Cambodia of Arsenal fans. I mean, that guy, I posted something about a guy I found on the street.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found, and in Istanbul, I found a little Turkish contingent of
Oh,
of
wow.
Arsenal fans as well. It's like a club, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a club that, you know, up until the last few weeks was just we were united in misery from the years of difficulty, but now the Arsenal is doing really well, and so it's actually an exciting little club to be in. My team, of course, Arsenal. But anyway, I also spent time in Cambodia, and when I was in Southeast Asia, that is, with I went to an elephant sanctuary. Now, have you ever spent any time with elephants, Shaya?
Yes.
You have?
In
Wow.
Thailand.
Oh, in Thailand.
Yeah.
You would have gone. Did you go to a sanctuary when you?
No. But
So
yeah,
you just encountered them somewhere?
no, like
the street?
there is a city called Ayota and something. But it like taxis there, literally elephant, and people live with elephant. And I spent some time in that city. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
I mean, I've been waiting to have this conversation with you. I haven't talked to you much about my trip, but when I spent the day with the elephants, I was thinking about you, Shaya. They're very, apparently they're very smart. I mean, but they're really lovely. Like they don't, I mean, they're huge,
Yeah.
you know, but they're very, very, anybody who's, and this, the one sanctuary that I went to is sort of committed to, these are rescue elephants, and it's committed to kind of letting them do what they do. So you don't ride them or get on them or anything.
Right.
You just kind of hang out with them and bathe with them and throw mud on them, and they like being washed in
Well,
mud.
I read somewhere that elephants react to us the way we react to puppies.
Oh,
Yeah.
So they think we're
So they think
adorable.
like we're cute and, you know, yeah.
I don't know about that. I think they just like food.
I mean, I'm sure.
Because they gave us a bunch of, like, the sanctuary has just bales and bales of like pineapples and like full on, like a giant pineapple.
Oh, wow.
And you just hold it, and the elephant with his trunk, you know, or her trunk, scoops it up and then throws it in their mouth. I mean, they eat.
Yeah.
Apparently, all they do is eat. They sleep for about 4 hours, and then the rest of the day they just eat.
Interesting.
Yeah. Hence the fact that they eat like
Eat
an
like
elephant.
an elephant, yeah.
But it was just such a very peaceful, loving, lovely animal. I fell in love with Vanessa, the elephant.
The elephant.
Yeah, we had a little relationship, short-lived,
nice.
however, because I had to fly away. But yeah, I have actually some little videos of Vanessa and I hanging out, and
Wow.
I remember the days when I used to tap her snout, and she would look at me and wonder if there's more pineapple to be eaten. And,
With loving eyes.
That was basically the relationship, but still. And then, of course, Istanbul. Yeah, I mean, it's. We're hoping to do if you have watched Talking to Persians London, or which is the premise again is going to a different city in the diaspora where we're finding who the Iranians are and what they're up to. And in this case, in the case of London, of course, is the added twist of going to the place of my
Yes.
birth and my home, the house that I was born in, and what ensues from that interesting little trip. But we're hoping to do this in different cities. So if you're listening to us and you have an idea about where we should come and why we should come there, and maybe kind of somewhat alternative in the sense that obviously talking to Persians Los Angeles or talking to Persians Toronto is going to be a no-brainer in terms of finding a large community there. But there's some places that we're talking about going to that that have fertile or growing Persian communities that you wouldn't necessarily think of. Anyway, Istanbul's, again, a little bit more obvious, but there's a huge and growing Persian community there. And I can't wait to do a talking. No Persians in Cambodia.
No Persians in Cambodia.
Couldn't find any.
Really?
Couldn't find. I mean, maybe there was one visiting or something. I tried. There was no. There was once a Middle Eastern restaurant when I was there. I was there a few years ago. It's since closed. Like there's no Persians.
I'm surprised. I feel like you could almost find Persians everywhere.
No, in Thailand there's a lot of Persians.
Yeah.
But not in. I couldn't find any in Cambodia. I mean, if you're listening to us right now in Cambodia and you're Persian, please let me know. I'll come next time and break some bread with you. But no, I couldn't find any. But of course, then you get to Istanbul and you're walking along the street and you hear Persian being spoken.
Probably more than anything else.
Well, Turkish is the most.
Yeah.
But you know this thing about Istanbul where they don't really speak English.
Really?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating that English is the lingua franca of the world now. Like anywhere, especially in the 21st century now, anywhere you go in the world, people speak English.
Right.
Like if a Polish guy is meeting an Argentinian in Germany, they speak English to each other, right? Various forms of English, but yeah. But in Istanbul, I mean, you get in a cab, and I had to sort of speak broken Turkish using Google Translate. Yeah, there was just no...
Wow.
Yeah, and I found this regularly in Istanbul. It's very interesting to me. A global city, a cosmopolitan city, a city that depends on tourism, but there's very little English.
Speak it, or is it that it's more of a pride thing, that they don't want to speak it?
You know, I asked a couple of Turkish folks about this. It's very nationalistic culture.
Right.
The Turks are very proud of Turkey, and good for them, you know. But I don't know if that's the reason. I actually don't know what the reason is. There's less of a premium on learning it, I guess, maybe. I mean, I would guess at this point, based on the audience that we have, that in Iran there's more people speaking English than there are in Turkey. You think so for sure?
Oh, definitely. I mean, recently, anyone who I talk to who has recently come from Iran here speaks perfect English.
Yeah.
And it's always been a question for me, like, where is it that you're learning or
You're not including Shia in that one.
No, but really, I think it's something that a lot of people pursue in Iran now, or at least from what I've experienced.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely, I mean, again, I'm surprised. In Turkey, there was a lot less of that. A lot of hand gestures for, please order, please give me this. I can't get enough of Turkish street food. I will. I could just every day. That would be my my mission to find some more street food, and it's such a and Istanbul, of course, being for folks who haven't gone there. I know we have an audience in Turkey. I'm guessing a bunch of the folks listening are in Istanbul, but it's all about being the nexus. It's the meeting place of East and West, of Asia and Europe, of Christian and Muslim, of old and new. Of modern, and I mean it's just such a fascinating place. It's the only place I can think of in the world where you come out of you could come out of some very Western type of nightclub at 4 or 5 in the morning and then hear the prayer call, across the city. And I mean, where do you get that, right? So it's a pretty special place. So we have to do a Talking to Persians Istanbul.
Definitely.
I feel like it's going to be 5 episodes long, though. 5 hours. Like how do you do one?
There would be so much to
Even
see.
with London, we had so much content, and we had to distill it into 1 hour. It wasn't easy. Next time in Cambodia, you come with me, Shai. You lived in Thailand for a while.
Yes.
And you love that part of the world.
It's like heaven. Yeah.
Why did you ever leave there then? Why didn't you stay in Thailand?
I went to United States in seeking a better life, but when I get to United States,
it wasn't so much better.
I understood that Thailand was the place.
What did you love about living in Thailand?
There is absolutely no judgment over there. You wear whatever you want, and always people laugh at you, and I live at peace,
Mm.
like that's the best definition. Peace lives there. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, if you think that, I mean, I Thailand is beautiful and lovely people, and but I found it. I always do find it, and you have to kind of fly through Bangkok. I was there for a couple of days to get to Cambodia or
Yeah.
something like that. But compared to someone like Cambodia, it's very touristy.
Yeah.
Cambodia is, you remove all of that, and you're just in a kind of, and it's a place that's just been through, kind of like Iran, except Cambodia's sort of on the other side of it now compared to Iran, but really, really turbulent last half century, and these people are resilient, and they've gone through that, and they still have a smile on their face, and they're welcoming, and they want to speak English, and it's just a very special place. I think next time I go to Cambodia, you must come. You must come
for sure. Yeah.
and then we'll be close to your Thailand, your Sydney. You have family in Australia.
Yeah.
We got to get you to that part of the world.
Sure.
Hey, coming up on this program, Kai Bird, of course, joining us in a little bit. Next week on this show, in the Roqe studio. You ready for this? 25 Band.
Yes.
The dynamic duo who've done huge things in Persian music. Big stars. They're going to be in the Roqe studio. It's going to be lovely to have them here. 25 Band here, and also in the coming days on Roqe, Behzad Balur in the Roqe studio. Makes his return, this time in our studio. So we look forward to that and much more coming up in September on Roqe. In the meantime, a big thank you to Hamid Reza Safipour for helping to make this episode of Roqe get to your ears and eyes. Hamid Safipour, Luxury Custom Homes, if you're in the Toronto area or an Iranian Canadian. You probably know the name Safipour. Hamid himself got his master's in civil engineering and got into the field of building and consulting on luxury homes over 3 decades ago. And in the last 20 years, Team Hamid and Nina have made the Safipour name one of the tops in the business, a name you can trust to buy your dream land and build your dream house. Safipour Luxury Homes have now teamed up with Remax, and they're moving into also doing exotic high-rises that are beyond things we've seen in Toronto before. If you're thinking to buy or sell or build your dream house, if you are anywhere near the Toronto area or interested in buying here, get in touch with Safipour. Safipour, safipour.com. Thanks again to Safipour for being a sponsor of Roqe. All right. Smart Pega and Groovy Shia will get to some letters about talking to Persians in just a little bit, but let's get to our featured guest. There is no event more impactful on the cleavage between Iranian and American relations in recent decades than the hostage crisis of 1979. This was the event that began on November 4th, 1979, when student activists or militants in Iran seized 66 American citizens at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held 52 of them hostage for more than a year. The crisis took place during the chaotic aftermath of Iran's Islamic Revolution, and the precipitant for the crisis was a raging anger towards the United States on the part of the revolutionaries in Iran, and particularly anger at the administration of President Jimmy Carter for allowing the exiled and ill Shah of Iran, who was deeply unpopular at this point and had fled the country, to seek and receive asylum in America. This followed a confused and vacillating period where President Carter had, of course, supported and then not really supported and then not at all supported the Shah as revolution occurred in Iran. And the event marked a major political liability for Carter. Indeed, the hostage crisis would hang over his neck for the final 444 days of his presidency. So what was the role of Jimmy Carter vis-a-vis the Shah, the revolution, and the hostage crisis? And how might there have been any other outcome if Carter had managed his foreign affairs differently? Well, to reflect on these questions, I'm joined by a Pulitzer Prize winning author who has recently published a book about Carter and this very subject. Kai Bird is an American historian, journalist, columnist, and acclaimed author who has gained global recognition for his biographies of political figures. Mr. Bird is an elected member of the prestigious Society of American Historians. He was born in Eugene, Oregon. As a child of a U.S. Foreign Service officer, he spent most of his childhood in Jerusalem, Beirut, Saudi Arabia, Cairo, and Bombay. He came back to the U.S. to continue his education and obtained a master's in journalism from Northwestern University. Mr. Bird's publications include The Chairman, John J. McCloy, and the Making of the American Establishment. His award-winning book, American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer, Crossing Mandelbaum Gate, Coming of Age Between the Arabs and Israelis, and The Good Spy, The Life and Death of Robert Ames. Mr. Bird's latest book from 2021, last year, entitled The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter, is the one we're focusing on today. And right now, Kai Bird joins me from Washington, D.C. today. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you on the show, and it's a really, really interesting book you've written about Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, well, most people think of Jimmy Carter as this fuzzy humanitarian do-gooder who builds houses for Habitat for Humanity and, was a great ex-president, but they regard him as a failed president.
Yes.
And my narrative, I think, paints a quite different picture of a man who is actually extremely political and politically devious at times, and ambitious and smart and very complicated man.
It's interesting that you should begin there, because I obviously I'm going to focus on the hostage crisis in our chat, but I was going to ask you this as a general question first, because you're quite right. The general vibe on Jimmy Carter, if you will, in these days seems to be nice, decent ex-president, as you say, who was a failure as a president. And the failure part, of course, is animated by what seemed like a vacillating, capricious, messy policy when it came to Iran by the late 70s, and of course the hostage crisis. I was surprised in your book by your depiction of Carter as, he's unquestionably smart. We knew that part, but also headstrong, tenacious, even arrogant, determined to win at all costs. How do we reconcile these different impressions of him?
Well, it's hard to reconcile, because the impression that we have of Jimmy Carter just doesn't fit the reality of the man. He was exactly what you have described him as, tenacious, and he's certainly decent, but I argue in the book he's probably the smartest, most intellectually capable president who's occupied the Oval Office in the 20th century, and hardworking and politically smart too. So it's hard to figure out why the myth, the public perception of Carter is just the opposite of the reality of the man.
He doesn't seem very politically smart, certainly in retrospect, and I guess at the time when it came to Iran. Let me begin in that this infamous toast that Carter does to the Shah of Iran on New Year's Eve, leading into 1978. That's because it's often discussed as a painful example of how tone deaf Carter and his administration were to the unrest that was bubbling in Iran and would lead to a revolution a few months later. Why was Carter so bad at reading the room, so to speak, at a crucial moment when it came to Iran?
Well, the toast at that late date was inept, as it turns out in retrospect. But at the time, every American official and every CIA estimate at the time was saying that the Shah's regime was stable and was going to be there for years, if not decades to come. And Carter, came in pledging to put human rights at the center of U.S. foreign policy. And so he was actually inclined to be rather critical of the Shah's regime, but he was persuaded that, the Shah was there. He wasn't going anywhere. It was a stable regime. And so on that trip, he gave the toast. I don't think it was a matter of being tone deaf. It was just a matter of bad intelligence, and the conventional wisdom was so set and concrete at that point that he didn't resist it. But as you can see in the narrative, he certainly had doubts about the Shah as things progressed and as the revolution gathered steam. He played a quite different role.
Yeah. Well, actually, one of the fascinating things you say in your book, because you talk about this, how as we get into 1978, you write that the CIA is saying Iran is, literally the quote from the CIA, Iran is not in a revolutionary situation. This is by the summer of 1978, demonstrating how the CIA doesn't always get it right.
Right.
But you say, interestingly, that Carter's instincts were different from that, and that he should have listened to his own instincts. What makes you say that, and what were his instincts?
Well, his instincts were to be critical of an authoritarian Pahlavi regime, and he genuinely believed in human rights and the values of human rights, and so he was skeptical of the Shah. But so he should have followed his own instincts. This is the man who appointed Pat Darien, a civil rights activist, to become Assistant Secretary of State for a newly created division of the State Department on human rights. And he defended Darien, who was a strong critic of the Iranian regime. And, people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, his national security advisor, was sort of a typical Cold War hawk who thought of the Shah as an ally and an ally against the Russian communist bear. But Carter his instincts were to side always with Pat Darien, and his instincts were to be critical of Zbig Brzezinski and to be critical of the Shah. So as the revolution suddenly got started in September of 78 with street demonstrations, Carter took a 5-minute break from his negotiations with Anwar Sadat
the phone call
in Camp David to have a phone call with the Shah and remonstrate with him, saying, I hope you can respect human rights and also restore law and order, but respect human rights. And that was the end.
Well, the call happens on September 8th, 1978, right after the army has opened fire on a massive crowd of thousands in Tehran's Jaleh Square.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so Carter's at Camp David with Sadat and Begin, and he calls the Shah. I mean, what happens in this call?
Well, I just briefly described it in the book, and it's a very short conversation, but he sort of in a perfunctory way says, I hope you can restore law and order, and I hope you can respect human rights. Two contradictory instructions at that moment. But the Shah, characterized the demonstrators and the street demonstrators as communists and subversives, and indicated he was going to crack down on them. But Carter was very much distracted. He wasn't paying attention to Iran at this point. His intelligence from the CIA was that the regime was stable and was going to be there forever. And he was concentrated on trying to bring peace between Arabs and Israelis. So
you say that this call was somehow seen or promoted as the Shah, as Carter continuing to stand by the Shah at this point. Yes.
Well, I think that's unfortunately how it was interpreted by the Iranian people. And probably by the press, but it was a perfunctory phone call. It was something he was told he had to do to respond to what was happening in Iran, but he wasn't paying attention, and he hadn't realized. He certainly in September of 1978 he didn't realize that a revolution was brewing. But he did make the point that the Shah should pay attention to human rights and try to respect the human rights of all Iranians. But this was, it was, as I said, it was a perfunctory phone call.
It also really, as you point out, it underscores the paradox at work here, right? Which is, please respect human rights. Also, please crack down on the protesters. So, I mean, what's the advice there? And that seems to be a symbol of what happens in this period with the Carter administration. How significant is the rivalry at this point that's taking place in the Carter admin between, specifically when it comes to Iran policy, between, as you say, Carter's national security advisor, Brzezinski, and his Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance?
Right. Well, it was very significant. And as the revolution grew more and more ominous as such, and the street demonstrations grew more, took to the streets and threatened the regime, Brzezinski and Cy Vance began to argue about how to respond to this. And Carter, again, his instincts were to side with Cy Vance, who argued that we can't intervene, we can't launch a coup d'etat, we can't control the situation, whereas Zbig Brzezinski was arguing, we have to show that we are standing by our longtime ally, the Shah. We have to consider a possible green light for a coup d'etat. Brzezinski was again playing the sort of Cold War hawk, and Cy Vance was saying, no, let's calm down now. The intelligence is mixed now. We don't know what's going to happen. We're not in control of the situation. We have to be prepared for perhaps the Shah falling. And by December, within just a few months, people forget how quickly this happened.
Right.
By December, it was clear that the Shah was on his way out, and they brought in George Ball to do a quick review of all the intelligence. And this veteran diplomat bluntly said, we've got to cut our losses. The regime is falling apart, and there's no chance for its survival. So we have to prepare the way to try to deal with the successor regime, whoever they may be. And of course, then there was an argument about, maybe there'll be social democratic moderates who will come to power with the religious leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, as a spiritual figurehead. That was the hope that people like George Ball and Cy Vance were sort of peddling. And, foreign service officers in the State Department who spoke Farsi and had some expertise about the situation were hoping that perhaps that would play out as the scenario. But as we all know, things quickly went a different route down the road to a theocracy.
I was a little confused or puzzled by Brzezinski's actions in your book. I was trying to get my head around it because he's clearly the hawk in the room, but as you describe him, he's the one counseling Carter late into 78 that there's not going to be a revolution. And then he's advocating for harsh military action when things get dire. So he doesn't seem to have a good sense of what's happening on the ground either, right?
Oh, absolutely. I argue in the book against all the conventional wisdom here in Washington, D.C., that Zbig Brzezinski was way in over his head. He's a Polish American who his foreign policy expertise was entirely focused on the Cold War and the rivalry between America and the Soviet Union. And he had this Polish animus against the Soviets, against everything Russian. And he saw every conflict, every foreign policy issue in the world through this Cold War prism. So he looked at what the Shah's regime stood for, and he saw, this is a right-wing, anti-communist regime, so we should support it. And he knew nothing about the internal politics of Iran. I think this is true not only of Iran, but of the Middle East in general and of Asia. Again, he had this sort of very narrow view of the world. And I think he led Carter down the wrong path many times. And Carter, what is peculiar in my narrative is that Carter sort of enjoys Zbig's company. enjoys arguing with him, but rejects 99% of his advice, but refuses to fire him, keeps him on, and slowly Big sort of poisons the well, and poisons Carter's relationship with the State Department and with Cy Vance. And in the end, it's Cy Vance who ends up resigning, not Brzezinski.
But you're quite right. You're quite right that it seems like, in retrospect today, posthumously, Zbig Brzezinski is seen as some sort of foreign policy guru. You know, that he was this sagacious foreign policy leader, which is certainly not what we get in your book.
Yeah, no, it's not at all what you get in my book. I'm very critical of Zbig Brzezinski. I think he was wrong repeatedly on many, many difficult issues.
You say something interesting. I think you said it in an interview where you said you appreciate that Carter understood what he didn't understand about Iran. Why does he deserve credit for that?
Oh, because, too many foreign policy experts claim to know too much about the rest of the world when, in fact, they know nothing. And they're ignorant often of the internal politics of a complicated society like Iran. And Carter was just the opposite. He was a man who, came out of Georgia politics, had no foreign policy background, and he was perfectly willing to admit to the fact that he didn't know a lot about the rest of the world, and he was kind of skeptical of this foreign policy establishment that claimed to know everything.
He was really invested in the Middle East peace process, so the accords with Begin and Sadat. Why wasn't he more invested in Iran?
Well, that's also sort of a complicated issue about goes back to his own personality and history. Remember, he's a Southern Baptist, born-again Christian. He has no foreign policy experience, but he has, read the Bible repeatedly. And he has this notion about when he achieves power, when he wins this very improbable election in 1976 and comes from nowhere to win the White House, he has this notion that once he has won power, he should do good with it. And he looks at the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli conflict, and he thinks, well, maybe I can bring peace to this troubled region, the region he calls the Holy Land. He refers to it as the Holy Land. So he becomes obsessed with the issue, and against the advice of Brzezinski and even Cy Vance and the entire foreign policy establishment says, Mr. President, you don't want to take on Arab-Israeli peace. It's a black hole. It's a tar baby. It's a hopeless issue. Carter thinks that no, he can, with the force of his personality and his personal diplomacy and his personal relationship with Anwar Sadat in particular. He can make progress, and indeed he does at Camp David.
I want to get to the hostage crisis and the meat of what we're talking about today. Let me ask you for a little context to begin with. I was a little kid at the time who had just come from Canada, but I can remember, and I certainly remember this because I was Iranian, that the hostage crisis leading the news on American TV networks seemingly for months, every single night. I mean, this is the pre-OJ and the White Bronco 24/7 cable news era. Just how big was the hostage crisis in Iran when it came to the attention of American media, citizens, and in fact the entire world?
Oh, it was an enormous story. And, Nightline made its name with Ted Koppel starting that news program, and that was on very late every night. And it would start with, well, this is day 23 of the hostage crisis, or day 340 of the hostage crisis. And it was, agonizing. And they would report in great detail about the back-channel negotiations of attempting to get the release of the hostages. And It was an enormous story, and it was deeply politically damaging to the Carter presidency. And ironically, he actually was not responsible and tried to do everything to prevent the hostages from being taken. And he actually predicted, in his diary, he made a prediction months before the hostages were taken, that if he gave political asylum to the Shah, he was afraid that American hostages would be taken at our embassy in Tehran, and then what would he do?
That's a perfect segue. Thank you, because that's where I wanted to go with this. The immediate precipitant for the student action of seizing the U.S. embassy in Tehran was the exiled Shah being allowed refuge in America. Why, after strongly resisting the idea, did Carter relent and allow the Shah, who was in exile and dying of cancer, to enter the U.S. for medical treatment? Why did he give in to Kissinger and Rockefeller?
Yeah, that again, it's a tragedy, and I think no longer a mystery. We know what happened, but the Shah goes into exile, and initially to Egypt, and then Morocco, and for months, Carter is badgered by Henry Kissinger, a retired national security advisor, and David Rockefeller, the chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank, and John McCloy, a powerful Wall Street lawyer. And they actually set up a private lobbying operation dubbed Project Alpha, and they appropriate money for this to hire a publicist, and they assign a lawyer from McCloy's law firm to work full-time on this, and they set out a schedule of where every week someone in the Carter administration is called up or taken out to lunch and lobbied to stand by the Shah, our old friend, and give him political asylum. And Carter says no repeatedly for months and months. And
because he thinks this is going to ignite.
He looks at the Shah as a deposed dictator. Why should we do anything for him at this point? And yes, there will be some political consequences perhaps in Iran, and this will make our relations with the new regime even more difficult. And what's the upside to it? And the upside, he's told by Henry Kissinger and McCloy and Rockefeller, is, well, we have to show that we're standing by our allies, our old friends. This is, it was political theater, but in fact what was going on was that behind the scenes, Chase Manhattan Bank, I believe, was trying to get access to money. They had at risk $500 million in loans that the Shah had taken out. And remember, they persuaded Carter to freeze Iranian assets. Right. And so they were trying to get, it was all about money.
But that explains McCloy. Is that also Rockefeller and Kissinger's
very much it was Rockefeller. And Kissinger went along with it. And, Kissinger also, I'm sure, truly believed in the argument that we have to show the rest of the world that we stand by our former, our long-standing friends, regardless of whether they're in or out of power. It was ridiculous, and Carter understood that it was bad diplomacy and might have terrible consequences, but finally, in late October of '79, when he learns that Cy Vance has changed his mind because of the information that the Shah is sick with cancer and is ailing and needs medical treatment in New York City. So again, on humanitarian grounds, Carter finally gives in and agrees to allow the Shah to come to New York. And of course, 4 days later, this precipitates the hostage crisis.
How misguided do you believe this decision would prove to be? And how do you believe the course of history would have been different if Carter had not let the Shah in?
Yeah, I think if Carter had appointed George Ball as his national security advisor instead of Big Brzezinski, this never would have happened. and history would have taken a different course, and the Shah would have gone into exile, and there would have been no hostage crisis. I don't think Carter could have done anything to stop the revolution. Khomeini was riding to power, and Khomeini, as we, looking back on it, he was determined to create a theocracy. And I think all of that would have happened. But Khomeini, when the Shah was given asylum, the students took over the embassy, and he seized the political opportunity to create a crisis that would allow him to engage, to orchestrate a purge internally of the new revolutionary regime and get rid of so-called moderates like Ibrahim Yazdi and Gobsadeh eventually and others. And this allowed him to cement his power and to create a really cruel theocratic dictatorship. And so it was extremely unfortunate that Carter was persuaded by Brzezinski and McCloy and Rockefeller to allow the Shah to come to New York. And as it turns out, we now know that medically speaking, the Shah would have gotten better treatment outside of America. In fact, the doctors in New York mistreated his medical maladies and made things worse. But that's another story.
This hostage crisis becomes an albatross that hangs around Carter's neck, as I said in the introduction, for his final 440 days of his presidency. His instincts in the beginning are to try to find a peaceful solution. Nothing works. How do we explain the vacillation in this period? Is this, again, the divisions within his administration? Why does it seem like there was no clear policy for something so profoundly important on the world stage?
Well, again, I would take issue with the word vacillation. I don't think he vacillated. In fact, he decided from the very beginning that he was not going to use force, as Brzezinski, for instance, was urging him to do, because he feared that using force in this situation would endanger the lives of the hostages. So he sided with Cy Vance again and argued that diplomacy and time would take care of this. And he did so knowing that this was going to be very politically costly. And so he stuck by his convictions on this for months and months, up until late March, when he finally, after months of frustrating back-channel negotiations and private emissaries going to Paris and trying to get someone inside the Iranian regime to talk to them and failing, getting close again and again and yet failing. Finally, in late March, Brzezinski persuaded him to explore the military option of a helicopter rescue mission.
Right, Desert One.
Desert One. And, in my narrative, I think I make a very convincing argument that this helicopter rescue mission was doomed from the beginning. It was just way too complicated, too many moving parts. If the helicopters had not had mechanical failures, and some of them had been forced to turn back, and if they'd actually made it into Tehran with the rescue operation, dozens of people would have been killed, Iranian and probably many of the American hostages. It was a disaster, and it was a disaster in what happened in the end. It
Pretty bad look for Carter at that point.
And it was a political blow to Carter.
Yeah. There's long-standing speculation, as you know, and you write about that, there was a deal in place between the Khomeini regime and the CIA to delay the release of the hostages until after the election, and that then Reagan, if he assumed the presidency, which he did, would treat the Iranians favorably, ensuring their access to military goods and frozen assets. And this would actually form the seeds of the Iran-Contra scandal. How much validity is there to that?
Well, you're referring to the October surprise, the so-called October surprise, and I devote a whole chapter by that name to this issue. And it was, it's very controversial. Historians argue about what exactly happened. But I found documents, and I think a critical document that shows that indeed, in the summer of 1980, as the hostage crisis was going on and on, Ronald Reagan, who was becoming the Republican nominee for president, his campaign manager was Bill Casey, and Bill Casey disappeared for a long weekend, first to London in late July of 1980, and then made, I argue, a secret trip to Madrid, Spain, where he met with a representative of the Ayatollah Khomeini. This meeting occurred, I believe, and Casey apparently told the Khomeini emissary, you guys will get a better deal from my candidate, Ronald Reagan, who understands Iran and is a friend of Iran, and unlike Jimmy Carter. And I think this, was almost an act of treason on Casey's part. I don't think Reagan necessarily had to know about it, but Casey loved sort of skullduggery of this kind and covert operations, and indeed he later was appointed by Reagan as his CIA director. But this is exactly the kind of sort of off-the-book covert operation that Casey loved to engage in, and I think he did it, and it contributed to prolonging the hostage crisis because there were negotiations going on, and in September they were very close to a deal, working out, a financial arrangement and a release of all of the hostages. And at the last minute, it was delayed once again, and that led to time running out for Carter in terms of the election.
And the conspicuous timing of the release of the hostages when Reagan comes to power. Would you go so far as to say that the Khomeini regime saw the incoming Reagan administration as these are guys we can do business with?
Yes. I think Khomeini understood that Reagan his people had made this overture. And Khomeini had it in his head that Carter was an enemy of the Iranian people because of his famous toast to the Shah in December of 1977, and because of his perception that Carter had opposed the Iranian Revolution, which I think is an exaggeration. And as we've talked about, I think Carter was very ambivalent and critical of the Shah's regime, and yet Khomeini had this perception that Carter was an enemy, and he did everything he could to sort of see him defeated.
It's a fascinating period, and it's a fascinating book, and I really appreciate the time you've given us. Let me ask you a couple of final questions about Carter and the way he's seen through the lens of history 4 decades removed now. I mean, the Carter administration's term is often portrayed as a period of international impotence, especially due to the Iranian hostage crisis. Is that fair to Jimmy Carter?
No, it's not fair. It's true that he became impotent as such through his refusal to use military force. If he had, right after the hostages were taken, if he had mined the Iranian harbors or launched air raids and killed a bunch of people and maybe saw some of the hostages killed, he would have been more popular. That would have been a politically advantageous thing for him to do. But Carter really had principles, and he was willing to sacrifice his own political capital to do the right thing. And he did this not only, with regard to Iran, he did this in his dealings with Israel, which is why he is so unpopular in Israel even to this day. He did this repeatedly on domestic issues. He was the kind of rare politician who decided that once he had achieved political power, he was going to do the righteous thing. And his wife, constantly was nagging him, Jimmy, please, why don't you postpone some of these more difficult issues like the Panama Canal Treaty or Middle East peace to your second term? Don't you want to get reelected? And Carter, insisted that he needed to do the right thing when he had power. And it made him a righteous president and sometimes an extremely effective and powerful president, but it also led to his political vulnerabilities, and ultimately he, lost his chance for re-election because of the Iranian Revolution, because he had ticked off liberals in his own party and stimulated a challenge by Ted Kennedy for the Democratic nomination. He alienated some of his own political allies in an effort to do the right thing.
Well, in terms of what he actually did do, and sort of ending off where we started with that idea that persists now of Carter as the nice guy, decent ex-president who was a shitty president. You write on Jimmy Carter, this is your words, no modern president worked harder at the job and few achieved more than Carter. That's certainly not the way he gets treated by the media or opinionators in reflecting on great American presidents these days, but from the past, where Carter tends to always rate quite low. What are they missing?
Well, they're missing his achievements. They forget that this is the president who deregulated the American airline industry, allowing middle-class Americans to fly for the first time in large numbers. He deregulated the trucking and railroad industries. He deregulated natural gas, which eventually led to America's boom in natural gas and fracking and energy independence. He even made it possible for Americans to drink decent beer with the deregulation of the alcohol industry, which allowed boutique breweries to pop up in cities all over America. He mandated that seatbelts and airbags had to be built into every new American car manufactured, and this alone saved 10,000 lives every year. Abroad, he passed the Panama Canal Treaty. He negotiated a SALT II treaty. He negotiated the Camp David peace accords that took Egypt off the battlefield for Israel for 2 generations. And yet Carter, despite all these achievements, because he was defeated, because he was a one-term president, because he was followed by Ronald Reagan and this sort of conservative revolution that changed America, he's regarded as politically ineffectual and weak. But it's a ahistorical tale, and my book, I hope, does much to sort of set the record straight.
Kai Bird, it's been a great conversation and a great education. I thank you for this today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Kai Bird, an American historian, journalist, and columnist, and the acclaimed author of his latest book, and this is from 2021, entitled The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. Kai Bird joined me from Washington, D.C. today. Back on for Smart Pega and Groovy Shia. It was so interesting to me. I mean, having read the book, you could see I was quite enthusiastic about it. It's right up my alley in terms of my areas of interest. But this idea of Carter as tenacious and not just the lovable, if bumbling, ex-president who now builds houses, I think is fascinating.
Yeah, it was such a different approach to the way he's looked at.
Yeah,
I'm intrigued to read the book now.
Yeah, the book, to be fair, is not only about Iran. There's a couple chapters about the hostage crisis, etc., but it's about Carter, and it's not a small book. But the stuff about Iran is fascinating, and how it was almost like acts of omission rather than commission. It was like Iran became an afterthought to a certain extent when he's talking about how Carter's so focused on the peace in Israel and Egypt and with Begin and Sadat, and then he makes a 5-minute phone call to the Shah and says, "Hey, remember human rights," and and then the disarray, and I mean, he's saying by 78, no one thinks there's going to be a revolution. It's amazing how how out of it the U.S. was, but I guess even many Iranians didn't see that coming.
But I love the part where he was saying that in Carter's diaries he had some, I guess, ideas or premonitions, or he was saying that he had kind of seen it coming.
Yes.
And he foreshadowed some of the events that took place. I thought that was so...
Which is ironic because Carter's the one guy that everybody makes fun of.
That's right.
Not seeing this coming, and it's interesting. And of course the deals being done with Reagan, beforehand, like this is a guy we could do, the Khomeinists, this is a guy we could do business with, and all of that. Interesting period, and an interesting reflection from Kai Bird. If you're interested in that book, The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. Hey, before we leave today, I should mention, first of all, next week, 25 band in the Roqe studio. But Talking to Persians London is now available for streaming at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Roqe Media. And we've been getting some letters. I promised to give us the letters theme there, Shaya. Oh. All right. I promised that I would get to a couple of letters. Let me just actually, now that I think about it, there's a spoiler alert in these letters.
Uh-oh.
Do we still care about that once the series is out? Once the show's available?
You can mention there's a spoiler.
Yeah.
All right. Here's a spoiler.
Give a warning.
Here's a spoiler. If you haven't watched it yet and you want to watch it and you want to be surprised, then don't listen to these letters. This one from Solmaz Barqir. Solmaz says, "That was very touching and amazing story. I really enjoyed watching how you went from looking for the house you were born in to being at a home with people you discovered. Great talks. Please make a second video of this trip. Still thirsty to have more drops. Thank you, Roqe team." We could make about 100 more episodes of this trip, but we'll probably keep it to the one. But that's amazing. Thank you so much. This from MH. Watching Jian saying, "I wonder if I should knock on the door." So this is when I go up to the house that I was born in. There's a moment I'm with Ali Azimi and Captain Reza, who's filming, and I kind of go, we're standing there. That's all we had planned for at that point, was just to go and look at the house. And look, this is where I was, and point at it. And then I say, well, maybe this is something I should go knock on the door. This person says, watching Jian say, "I wonder if I should knock on the door," something, and then bracket, something I'd be reluctant to do. And Captain Reza immediately encouraging him to do so while loudly chewing gum. Did you hear that? That Captain Reza's chewing gum?
Yes.
All that followed was a lesson about life for me.
Wow.
When given the opportunity, knock on the door and see what's on the other side.
Absolutely.
And this from Arveen. Wow, I just finished watching the whole thing, and to say I loved it would definitely be an understatement. It was truly phenomenal, an amazing work of art. Hamish Kamal Bud, as we say in Farsi. Great work as always. I still can't believe that Jian returned to his childhood home and found that, spoiler alert, an Iranian family was living there. I really loved the music selection too. Went perfectly with the flow of the film. 10 out of 10.
Great.
Thank you for that, Arveen, who has two names that are the same.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. I know you're both clearly possibly going to be passing from this life in the next.
I hope not.
I hope you're better by next week and energetic. But thanks for doing today's podcast with us. And Groovy Shaya, feel better.
Yes.
Kick that COVID. Smart Pega. Merci.
Thank you.
Thanks to those of you out there listening. This is Full Time for Roqe for today. For all things Roqe related, if you've not been there yet, it's also where you can find Talking to Persians, our series, The Contemporary History of Iran, former Roqe episodes, our guests, our videos, our funnies, roqemedia.com. Roqemedia.com is where you go. and where you can also become a patron of our show and support us. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together: Savi Roham, talented Anahita, the fabulous Keon, Super Patty Saw, Smart Pega, Alhai Mertad, Captain Reza, and Groovy Shia. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. You can always find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. Find our show on Instagram at Roqe Media. And in the meantime, as ever, this is for you, Pega. You know what I'm about to say.
I do.
Mizu Bashi.